Awesome. Okay, so Gary, Jim, thank you for being here. Welcome everybody watching. I'm Craig Monroe, founder of Elegant Literature. I'm here with the judge of the Haunted Hideaways contest, Jim Hall, and Gary Malone, the $3,000 award winner with the story Deincarnation. So thank you for coming and congratulations, Gary.
No worries. I'm very excited.
Fantastic. So we want to get to know a little bit about you and talk about your story. Anybody watching this, if you haven't read it yet, go download the Haunted Hideaways issue. It's number 13. It's free for you to read. There's some great stories in there, and Gary's should be your focus. Go watch that. Go read that and come back and watch the rest of this talk. So, Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you to chat Gary up here. Let's find out about the inspiration behind his story.
Yeah, excellent. Well, first off, congratulations. You'd mentioned prior that you were going to take a whole year to do this and try each month. And you said you got it on the third month. So now you can take the next 9 months off. So congratulations.
Yeah, that's right. Job done in the nicest possible way.
No, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think, and I know I wrote a little bit on it, like the part that I liked, or what attracted me most to it was how personal it was, and how there was not only the surprise and scariness of the theme, but also just the personal, like the personal through line or the way into the story felt very like I could actually relate to the character that's in there, as opposed to just being super scary. So is that something you do with all your stories that you work on, or is it to just happen to be this one story, or what's your process like that?
It's interesting. I've often wondered what people mean when they say a process, because for me, it's just something that flows. I just try and start with the kernel of an idea, and then various other things get papier-mâché onto it. When it comes to a short story that has a much higher ceiling of word limit than 2,000 words, that's something you can do in a much more creative way. So you can kind of graft more elements onto it. When you're, let's say, funneled into the embrasure of just 2,000 words, you got to be pretty ruthless about what you prune out. So there's no time for front-loading the story with a lot of backstory, if I can mix a metaphor. In point of fact, the limits were so constrained that I think there was at least one paragraph in the beginning when I'm trying to explain how the protagonist got into this situation and give a little flavor of his character that I thought, okay, so that's probably a paragraph too long. Should I remove that paragraph? But then the decision you have to get into is, if you remove that paragraph, is it going to do more damage to the reader's ability to understand the story than if you leave it in? If that's the case, then it's a sort of balance of opposites, and you have to make that judgment. I would say, Jim, I don't have any formal process as such. I'll put it this way. The one thing I know that I tend to do a lot is I will type out, let's say, for example, a page or two of prose. Then I'll read back over it immediately, see if there's anything I can refine about it. What's interesting is what happens next. And even if there isn't something that I can't refine about it there and then, I tend to leave it for a few days or even as much as a week. And then when I come back a week later, that thing that just seemed flawless or wasn't in need of any correction, now all of the purple prose just starts to extrude. All of the flaws that you didn't know were there start to come out. And I'm not the psychologist, but I think what's actually happening there is that when you write it and then read it immediately, what you're doing is you're reading it as the writer. When you come back a week later, you're reading it as the reader. You have forgotten what it sounds like. And so you will find yourself looking at, let's say, a passage, and you kind of go, oh man, that sentence really just doesn't strike the right note. Or something in a paragraph is a little bit contrived and you can do it a little bit better. You can sense yourself being a little bit too flashy, using words that have too many syllables in it or something like that. So, you tend to refine it a little better when you have forgotten what it sounds like. That's really the only formal tip I can offer or insight into how I write, really.
Yeah, I found that. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say, do you normally start with do you have any idea what you're going to write? Do you outline or anything like that and plan the story, or you kind of just start with the kernel of an idea and write it out and see where it takes you?
I think it's more like, yes, it's sort of like taking a line for a walk. I'm very conscious of where it's not going well. So I think this is kind of an optical illusion that authors can sometimes get into. So you can have a situation whereby you go, This idea is difficult to make work, but I'm going to put in the hard yards to make it work. What a writer can tend to lose sight of because he's sitting on this side of the desk is that when that story is delivered into the reader's hands, they can't tell the difference between a story that you've worked, say, a bad story that you spent 15 hours working on, as opposed to a good story that took you just 3 hours. They don't get to see the effort you put into it. All they see is a good story and one that is not working so well. So you don't get points for effort because the reader can't see your effort. And so it's not there's a sort of like martyr syndrome that you can get psychologically trapped into, as in, let's say you don't want to be the quitter who quit his own story having thought it up, but there does come a point at which if it's not working and the only way you can make it work is in some contrived way that's going to feel a little bit forced to the discerning reader at least, then there comes a point in which you just have to pull the pin. I think Edward de Bono used to say that it's true even of problem solving, which is because I'm a software engineer, it's the field I work in. There comes a point at which it is very cognitively difficult to stop digging the hole that you're in right now and think, am I actually even doing this in the right place? Because there's a sort of sunk cost syndrome. You've put a certain amount of work into this idea, and so it becomes very difficult to abandon. But I'm kind of conscious of going, okay, if I keep going for another 6 hours and it's going to go nowhere, I'm better off just pull out now and write a 3-hour story rather than a 15-hour one that won't be any good.
Yeah, because the writing seemed very effortless. Like it seemed like you had the ending already worked out from the very beginning. Is that true, or you just kind of went with it, and then each iterative process? Oh, this is where I'm going to go. Oh, this is where I'm headed.
It's kind of you to say so. You're probably right in that it sounds that way, but remember that you sometimes can't tell the difference between a writer who is very skilled at working that sort of thing out and can just snap the lid shut at the end of a story in a way that just seems completely seamless, and someone like me who just kind of got lucky on this occasion. Remember that it's kind of a lottery ticket situation when you well, in a reduced way, there's no point in looking at the winning ticket and say, well, it was destined to be me. You can just have an idea that plops into your head, and even as you unfurl it like a sort of origami in reverse, it just folds out very neatly. That's not always the way. And I'm sure I've had other stories that didn't get shortlisted or win any prizes for exactly this reason, because they weren't working out, but that was the best I could do that week. So it's kind of good to say so, Jim, but I would say never discount the element of luck in these kind of things.
Yeah, no, and I guess as a reader, what I really appreciated was the character. Like there was the line about how he really does deserve himself. I don't know if that's what to say. Was like, oh, I think I can relate to that. And just the fact that he's going to be there forever, and now is, I don't want to spoil the ending, but
well, anybody watching this should have read the story already by now, so we can talk about the ending if you want.
No, just the idea that like there's a reason like I actually care about it, because there's lots of stories that were scary and had really cool concepts, but because I had a way into it, I just felt more a part of the story, so it was more engaging, and it was just like, oh, yeah, I was like laughing out loud. I was reading it, the certain surprises and stuff like that. So I, as a reader or as an audience member, I totally appreciated that. Is that something that you always try to put in your stories, or is this like complete luck? And it's just this one story was something that you had that in there.
I'm going to go for the modest answer and say I just lucked out. I mean, I think it was Claude Corbin used to say, sometimes to be lucky, you have to kind of believe in luck. So if you take an idea that just feels good, I would say run with it, particularly if you're running against a deadline. Just thinking about what you were saying, it is interesting that you wound up engaging with this character, because he's not set up to be particularly sympathetic. I'm glad we're not in spoiler alert territory, because I can say that his fate at the end of even this short story is pretty condign. He's not a particularly pleasant character. He relishes his publicly bad reputation for being a sort of ruthless CFO at Big Pharma. He's an adulterer. He can't give up the habit of being a philanderer even after he dies, which is a kind of an almost unique situation in the story. Not even death stops him. And so it just goes on like this. So the closest I can come to something analogous to that is that the actor Michael Fassbender, when he was interviewed about his role in the movie Shame, which is about another character who's essentially deplorable. He's, I think, a pornography addict and something like that. And he has a very dysfunctional relationship with his sister. He said, I was reading about his character, Brandon, and I liked him. Not in a way that the character is likable, but it's sort of a character that is compelling for, I think, an actor to step inside. I'm probably drawing, I don't mean to overdraw this comparison a little too much, but I think I know what I mean when perhaps even people such as yourself say, I like this guy, even though on the surface it's not obvious that he's a likable character. Sometimes people who are deplorable are just interesting to step inside their minds and just figure out what's going on in there.
Oh, I totally agree. I would say 100% he's extremely sympathetic, if not empathetic. And even though I'm not perhaps as ruthless as him, there are other similar approaches that I've taken to life where I could relate to him, even though I might not have taken it to the same lengths that he did. So, yeah, whether or not he's likable or not, like that's a great example, the Fassbender from Shame, right? Or Shameless or whatever it was. Because he's extremely likable in that. Yeah, likable to me is like, is it well written? So whether or not they're nice people or not is up to other people to decide.
Yeah, this guy seems like a total jerk, but like he also seems like a very real person that, I was reading it going, yeah, this guy totally exists. Like this, yeah, you use some great examples in there and the way he's spoken. You could tell how he looked at the world. And I'm like, yeah, this guy's a jerk, but that's who this story is about. And that like helped me get into the character and see the story from a close perspective from his point of view, which helped me get into the story so that I was fully invested in and engaged. I wanted to say that there was, for me, it was very unique, a unique premise where he, ends up with another version of himself as a ghost trapped there. Like I haven't seen anything like that before. Was there something that inspired you to come up with that, or what were you thinking about when you had that idea?
You're perfectly right in that neither have I heard of a situation in which a ghost gets haunted by himself, having already died. So yeah, that was the point at which it was a good point to stop the story, because it would have become more convoluted, and then you draw it out, and then the reader's just going, okay, you're just being clever for the sake of it. I'll explain. So the idea came to me basically as follows. I sort of fused together two concepts. One is, from the rational world, we know that people can undergo clinical death. They can be resuscitated having done so. So you can die on the operating table for a number of minutes, and then the doctors can bring you back to life. In the non-rational world, if you're disposed this way, we believe that when you die, when the body dies, the spirit departs. So I sort of snapped these two things together and thought, well, what happens if, in the following order, the body dies, the spirit departs, and then the body's brought back to life, but the body now functions kind of like a turnstile in that the spirit cannot get back in; it's just departed forever. In that situation, you have what is essentially the human equivalent of Schrodinger's cat, in that the same universe is inhabited by a living incarnation and a dead incarnation of exactly the same person. So the scene was just set for a farce, which is why, if you don't mind me saying so, Jim, I thought your review very much flattered the story, because I set it up kind of as a laugh, and I thought you read very profoundly into it, including spotting something that even I hadn't spotted, which is that the guy continues to misbehave even in death. And so it kind of goes from there. And when I originally set this up, I thought of it as a farce that was going to take place in the afterlife. Let's say, I thought of the afterlife as a kind of vast, sprawling bureaucracy, having intramural disputes. So one department blames the other department for taking this guy's soul too early, and then this bureaucratic argument breaks out. But it's just something about it just seemed cumbrous, and I thought, this is going to be like trying to do a 3-point turn with an aircraft carrier. It's just going to be like it's going to be too awkward to maneuver. So I decided to just not bother with that and just simplify it. And what I did was I turned it into a first-person narrative. The advantage that gives is, I was about to say it's like an unreliable narrator. It's not precisely, but I'll come back to that point. What the advantage that gives is that you're trapped because you're trapped inside the perspective of the person who's telling the story. You only know what he knows, and this guy doesn't know that he's still alive out there somewhere. So you have a man who is haunting the Airbnb where he died having an affair years ago, and then he doesn't know that he was brought back to life, and then the living incarnation of him this weekend comes back to have another affair with someone else. And so you, like I was saying earlier, the scene is set for a farce. Obviously, if you have the living incarnation and the dead incarnation, the fun arises from them not knowing that the other exists, and then they collide with each other one weekend, and then chaos ensues.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting that you said you're playing it for a farce. Jim looked into it kind of in a more serious perspective and even saw things that you hadn't noticed before. And I absolutely love that about storytelling, is that the author can intend one thing, but you're basically magically beaming thoughts into somebody else's head through time, which I always thought was a cool concept. But the way they receive those thoughts and perceive them can be different than intended. And like I thought it was like a farce, and I got the laughs too, but I also saw some more takeaways because I'm reading it more critically like that, kind of thinking about that as I read these stories. So I can see where both of you are coming from. And I just think it's so cool that happens with authors and readers and storytelling in general.
Yeah, I've been in this situation before. I mean, a good example of it was, I'm going to show my really dorky side here, but when I was in the debating society in college, I was on the committee, and a friend of mine said, look, I'm really stuck for a motion for Thursday night. Can you give me something I can go with? So I gave her this particular motion, something to debate. At the time I handed it over to her, I thought there's only one way to interpret this, so this is how they're going to do it. And I had a feeling, all the speakers are going to run out of gas. They're going to just rake over the same point several times. And then I sat in the theater on that Thursday night and watched as all 10 speakers found a completely different way to interpret that motion and ignored the only way I thought there was to interpret it. So it's a perfect example, actually, of like, I experienced this even reading Jim's very kind adjudication. Perfect example of when you think up an idea and then you hand it over to someone else, there's a sense in which you're surrendering it. They are actually just, it's a sort of prismatic thing. They are going to bring their own life experience and views to it. They're going to interpret it in their own way. They're going to see it maybe in a complete different way to the way you did it. So it's almost like there's a sort of shallow sense in which every short story is kind of like a Rorschach test.
Yeah, I just loved it. I'm in the business of reading stories and then explaining to people why they're better than other stories. So for me, it was whether or not it was intentful or not. Just the whole concept of using the position or the situation that he was in to kind of discuss his, if you want to call it character flaw or whatever it is, kind of his own sort of baggage that he's been dealing with. I just thought was so clever and just really brought me into it, and just really stood out. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that. I mean, lowest common denominator for me is that you just don't bore the reader. Maybe you've had the same experience as me. I even go into like bookstores and I'll pick a published work off the shelf. The back of the jacket will say something like, the family are gathering for a weekend. They haven't seen each other in years. During this tumultuous weekend, flaws will come forth, arguments will erupt, secrets will come out. It's back on the shelf before I've even finished the sentence because there are 30 others like it. Whereas if you say something like, I'm trying to think of an example. If you say, this girl has been abused from when she was young and she has finally fallen in love. Something like that. This is not a sterling example, but almost in a single sentence, you all already want this character to succeed before she has even, before you've even found out who she is. And so I'm kind of a sucker for plot lines that can be expressed in a pithy way that really hold your attention. I do try and respect the reader's attention span as much as I can, without without insulting their intelligence. I'll put it that way. There are a few novels I've noticed that open with a paragraph that almost betrays a kind of inferiority complex that you're going to move on to the next book. That's an unfortunate accident because it tends to telegraph to the reader that the author doesn't believe in his own work and he's fearful about how you're going to perceive it. I'm always happy enough to continue reading any book whose first page shows a kind of self-respect, if I can say so, on the part of the author. A certain amount of confidence is just good enough for me.
I think that reader entertainment is probably the most valuable thing in a story. Like if it has wonderful prose but is boring, and very vivid descriptions but aren't exciting or is not gripping, it's going to be boring. If it has, really interesting characters but they're not entertaining you, it's, any kind of, the main purpose of a story for most stories that we're reading for entertainment purposes is to keep the reader entertained and make them have fun. And so even if a plot line is kind of bad, but I'm having fun reading the story, for one reason or another, I'm going to keep reading the story. And I really thought you did a great job at making it fun for the reader, and while also hitting all these key areas to make it a good story rather than just a fun, lighthearted romp or something like that. You did that, but you only had 2,000 words, and you showed us a character that seems real. He's a jerk. I can see him as a real person, but you also managed to work in like the objective story of this whole affair happening and meeting himself, and the other two characters seemed quite real as well. And so that it's you did a very good job of telling a great story that kept my attention, made me very entertained, within a very limited amount of space, which is kind of exactly what we're looking for when I go through a couple hundred 2,000 word stories. I'm looking for something that has like great character, a compelling story, and is entertaining and fun, something that's that I really enjoy. And you hit all of those marks for me.
Well, I'm glad you liked it for exactly those reasons. As regards the sort of the entertaining part of it, I should say that I don't know the extent to which I've succeeded in being witty, but when I try to sow some sort of wit into the story, I do try and make it a byproduct of something that is at least acting as the praxis of the story itself. In other words, something that's like driving the plot forward a little bit. And the reason for that is because, I don't know if you guys had this experience. I find this particularly in comedy movies, not so much in written fiction, but you might have watched a movie and found yourself sensing that the screenwriter in this comedy is sort of wheeling the big gun into position so that the big joke is about to fire off. And then when it fires off, it's actually not funny. The problem with that, of course, is that there's a sense in which the screenwriter has sort of set himself up for failure because the scene has only one purpose, that is to get a laugh. And when it doesn't get a laugh, this whole scene is wasted. So what I've tried to do whenever I'm trying to be funny is that I might say something acerbic that could be taken as just, let's say, a judgment on the character, but could also be found funny if you're inclined towards finding that kind of caustic wit funny as well. But it's always like a byproduct. So in other words, let's say it's always like a sort of 20% extra free that's sort of glued onto a particular scene that was going to happen anyway or was going to move the plot forward anyway. I would say that the funniest scenes that I've ever read have generally not come from comedies. They've usually come from it's not necessarily real life, but sometimes it's just a case of where the author is just so exhausted and fed up with something, he just says something really cutting about it, and you just have to put the book down for 30 seconds and laugh at the way he said it. I found that it is very difficult to write a very amusing encomium, but it is pretty easy to write a very amusing satire. Nobody ever finds a song of praise really funny or very witty, but the minute you take the knives out, you decide I'm going to have a go at this particular subject or person. If you've got the talent to be witty about it, it usually works a lot better than praise. I'm sorry to say. I don't know what that says about human nature in general, but that's what I found.
I like your point about. Well, now I'm drawing a blank. How you're when you're injecting humor into the scene, that you are trying to like add it on so that even if the joke falls flat, there's still value and like meat to the scene that will carry the reader forward through the story, even if the joke is flat. And I think that's a really great way of approaching it, and a really good way that you articulated it for any new writers that are watching this video to kind of learn about what you did with the story that won the award. And what they could do in their work is if they want to include humor, not to kind of try and drive at humor as the point of the scene without anything else, because if you miss the mark, then the scene may fall flat. And I think that's a great thing.
Thank you.
It actually leads me in. Some of the things you said there led me into a question I had. Is some of the things, especially on the first page, some of the scenes made me laugh, where you were talking about a husband who was trying to plug somebody in the wall with terrible consequences, and the main character who talked about how he ate a cake that was made in a bust of himself, and then he got sick, and that spoke a lot about his character and his job and the public's opinion of him. I was wondering, they made me laugh, but I was wondering if they were from real life. As you said, some of the funniest things are from real life. Were those things you just made up, or were they inspiration from experiences you've had or stories that you've heard elsewhere?
The second thing about the more contrived thing was completely made up, which is like a sort of confectionery based sculpted candy bust of a birthday cake made of this man himself. That I completely made up. I'm sorry to say the story about rewiring the plug is slightly borrowed from my student days. I remember going out one night with a bunch of engineers. They came back at 2:00 in the morning, completely hammered. This was Ireland after all. And so we went back into their flat. And myself and a friend were sort of playing a game of drafts. And these guys decided in this inebriated state that now was a good time to go and get around to rewiring that plug with fairly predictable results. They wound up wiring it the wrong way, something like 4 times, which means that I believe, since there's only 3 wires inside a plug, that means they tried the same faulty combination twice. So they wound up electrocuting themselves this many times. And by the time myself and the guy who was my drafts player walked into the room, the socket on the wall was just this sort of like explosive layer of soot. The thing had just gone wrong so many times, and they just gave it up. I don't know why the fuse didn't blow. The lights certainly didn't go out. Like, I remember us being able to continue our game. But there's almost, even in that scene, there's something a little bit like the kind of battle of the sexes, in the sense that the guy always thinks he's more capable, he's got this, and the wife is kind of like, if you're not really sure, you probably shouldn't try. And so that's what I meant by poetic justice kind of dangling over that scene. Reality is going to show this guy, and then all the lights are going to go out, and of course that's the perfect atmosphere for the ghost to double down on this problem and just come out and reveal himself.
Yeah. So how does this stack up, this story, against things that you normally write? Actually, before you answer that, what is your background with writing? Because you mentioned that you are a software engineer,
Sure.
and so obviously Elegant Literature is a contest and magazine for new writers, but that doesn't mean that you haven't been writing for years and just starting to take it seriously now. So what is your background with writing fiction?
Well, I won't give you a complete autobiography, but because I grew up in a small village in the west of Ireland, I didn't have a whole lot to do during summer. So I used to write really bad science fiction every summer. One of my teenage years, I wrote an incomplete novel almost every summer. Now, when I say I wrote it like in copybooks. I had no typewriter, that kind of thing. I don't know how many thousand words. So that was like the genesis of it. And I went through a number of like sort of fiction winters, I guess, in which I just never picked up my pen at all. So it's a sort of like a stop and start thing. I go through a period of just deciding to enter short story competitions and just writing them for fun. The genesis of the latest incarnation of this, entering the Elegant Literature contest, came one night when I was just sitting in my house bored, and I texted a friend. And I said to her, "Give me 3 words, I will turn it into a short story within 1 week." It took 2 weeks. And so, having done that a few times with my friend and found that she actually liked those stories, I thought, well, I'm doing this for an audience of one. Why not see if there's something out there where I can do this on a regular basis for an audience of much more than one? And who knows, there might be some prizes in it, that sort of thing. So I really started this in a non-serious way. Looked at Elegant Literature, and I regarded it, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, as a kind of project, a sort of homework, like a regular thing that you had to do every month, which would keep your creative juices flowing. And I would say that although this is only my third, I think now fourth attempt at it, I've never really gotten stuck. In fact, a couple of times when I entered more than one story. I didn't think I could do that within 1 month. I've always thought of myself as a bit of a slow burner when it comes to creativity. Maybe it's to do with the fact that the ceiling is low. It's only 2,000 words. But like I said, for the aforementioned reasons, that's also a good thing too, because it gets you to ruthlessly prune out the things that might bore the reader. So in summary, did it as a kid. I graduated in literature from university at master's level as well. And so I've always had that kind of semi-literary streak, despite the occupation I'm now in. It's really just a hobby.
Well, I think hopefully you've received some validation on how the quality of your story is, since you've now won an award, got paid for your writing, and have an audience of definitely more than one.
Yeah, it's quite gratifying. Yeah, thank you.
That's all I have. Deconstructed too much. It's like it should live on its own now. And it's great to hear all the different. Do you see any sort of thing, like any connection between software development and writing, like fiction writing? Do you see any kind of connection between the two?
The blunt answer is no. They really are completely separate fields. I can give you a sort of two-pronged answer to that. I guess I got into software engineering because I got job satisfaction from solving technical problems that are practical, even if they're abstract. And I get, this is going to sound dreadfully pompous, but for want of a better word, I get intellectual satisfaction from doing a lot of reading and writing. And so there are two aspects. They're just two aspects of who I am. But I have to say it's a little bit unusual as a combination to find in one person, because I don't know what you guys found, but when I was going to school, all the guys who were good at STEM subjects typically struggled in literature, and particularly languages. I knew guys who, like in their fifth year of French, were still mispronouncing basic words. They just couldn't get their heads around it, or didn't think it mattered. And so, like, I guess it would have fallen into the guy who was always good at English, but I was like struggling at math somewhat. Nonetheless, I've managed to make a career out of this technical field because it's not all math, thank God.
Yeah, I think that's quite common for because a lot of the math and sciences and the engineering and things like that are very analytical based, and somebody who's got a really good mind for analytics might not also have the sort of creative freedom to explore literature. And also there's so totally different things that it takes time to explore something, right? So you'd have to kind of be branching out. But for somebody that is minded for both of those and takes the time to explore sort of both interests, it can yield a lot of things. Like I'm quite similar to you in the way that I took all the sciences and maths in school, and I was looking at being an engineer before I decided not to be, and obviously ended up in writing. But it yields some very interesting ways of looking at things. Like, you're very pragmatic about entering every month for a year, and then taking stock of where you were and kind of like running your stats and your numbers to figure out what that might tell you, and get some information feedback from the data. And I think that not all writers would approach something like that, because some people aren't as sort of analytical minded. And I think it can be a very good combination.
I tend to think of it as being a numbers game, purely in the sense that you need to figure out how many times you're failing and against how many competitors. So the good thing about Elegant Literature is that All the data is right there. You can find out not only how many people you were competing against at the end of the month, you can find out how many people you're competing against on day 5, 10, 15, because the total keeps updating. I noticed that there is something of a charrette, or there is a stampede towards the end. I think more than almost every time I've looked at that counter, more than 50% of the entries are in the final 24 hours. But nonetheless, you do get to find out how many people you're competing against, and so therefore what percentage you came into. And so I tend to think that you can sort of run the numbers, and if you do it for long enough, you can say, look, I got highlighted, got longlisted this many times, therefore that means I fell within the top 15%, let's say X many times. If I just keep going, it's kind of a real situation. Sooner or later, my number will come up and you might actually win the top prize. So yeah, you've ruined my plans in the nicest possible way.
Oh, I'm sorry to ruin your plan.
No, like I said, in the nicest possible way, Craig.
Yeah. Well, I'm pleased to have ruined it, because I think that Deincarnation definitely deserves the praise that it's got, and the award. And you as an author, I can tell that you're very thoughtful. You're very humble as well about your work, but you're clearly very deep and thoughtful about your stories and how you approach them. So I think that it's great that you've won this award. And well, hopefully you can. I'd love to. Do you have plans to continue writing? Would you work on a novel, or is it mostly just short stories? Where would you go from here?
It's possible that I have something on the back burner that's much longer than a short story. I'll put it that way, but I'm going to keep it to myself at the moment.
Would you be open to like switching careers? If you wrote something that maybe a novel that got published and brought you some acclaim or something like that, and you had the option to move to writing full time, is that something you'd be interested in, or is it really just more of a hobby that you'd rather keep as a sort of a side hobby?
And the truth is, I would love to do both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think I'm particularly industrious, and I have enough spare time, thank God, that I could retain my day job and probably complete a novel to a publisher's deadline, if it really came to that. The reason I say that is because this is going to sound like it contradicts an earlier remark that I made about this sort of being a hobby that I can take or leave. I can take or leave starting it, but when I get into it, I really do just tend it through to the end. You may or may not have noticed this, but not only when I entered this Elegant Literature competition monthly did I produce more than one entry, but I actually sent them in early. So most of them, like I said, 50% of your entries seem to come in like in the last 24 hours. But I've had one sent in finished on day 10. Then I'll write a second one that takes you up to day 20, and then I just stop. So yeah, I would say that when I get into it, I am pretty focused. If I take it up, I'll try and do the best possible job I can with the highest possible respect to the reader's attention span. So when I'm in it, I get into it. When I'm out of it, that's not such a big deal.
Well, I mean, that's an admirable trait. I think it's the right approach to any project, really.
Yeah.
Great. So, Jim, did you say do you have any more questions? Anything else come to mind?
I would just say congratulations, and I really appreciate you taking the time to explain the process and go over it, because I know it's like different to do that, and I'm sure hopefully it'll help out other people who have similar aspirations or are equally as excited or involved in writing. Help give them some ideas of what to do in the future.
Glad to hear it. And like I said earlier, thank you very much for your kind remarks on it. It's always very gratifying to find that somebody has read something different into your novel, into your story that you didn't even know was there. So thanks, John.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. Well, I guess that will be all for today. Gary, thank you for joining us. Jim, thank you for judging the competition. Thank you for taking all the time that you have to work with me on these projects. Anybody watching this, Jim is a fantastic storyteller and has some pretty sweet credentials to his name. He's also done a training for Elegant Literature members, walking us through his 4 through-line theory of writing, story structures, and also demonstrating Subtext, which is his AI writing companion and outliner app that Jim actually coded himself. So Jim, as well, is a multi-talented kind of person. So go check out that training. I'll link it somewhere around here for anybody watching this video, because Jim basically walks you through basically a short storytelling masterclass, which was amazing. And then within, I think it was an hour, we got pretty much a full story outlined using your artificial intelligence software. It was really, really cool. And Jim is really talented. So go learn from him. Jim, I'm honored to have had you here, and thank you for taking the time to do all this again.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you for asking. And it was really fun. And my best to everybody out there writing, and keep writing the stories.
Yeah. And Gary, thank you. Congratulations again on winning the $3,000 award. You're also going to be invited into the new novelist accelerator if it's something that you're interested in, as an honorary member. So that's part of your prize, and you'll be paid the professional rate for your story. You're basically, I believe, considered a professional storyteller now by various governing bodies of the literature world. So thank you for taking the time to write the stories for us, and supporting Elegant Literature in general, and for submitting it, because I loved reading it. I loved your story, and it was really, really great to meet you and hear about how you approach writing. Thank you.
Thank you for setting this up. It's not just that it's like the prize money, but it's really fun to do. And like I said, I was just sort of drifting until such time as I had something as regimented as a story a month. So it really worked out well for both of us.
Yeah. Great. Well, wonderful, guys. Thank you for joining us today for this chat. Everybody watching this, thank you for tuning in and sticking with us this far. Go enter the contest. Go keep writing stories, and keep having fun. Thank you, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.